Restoring Illinois to greatness. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute and hosted by AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with John Tillman, President and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. And John, don't go crying for John Boehner. He'll do all the crying himself.
I'm sorry. What are we talking about here?
Boy, he really couldn't keep it together for the Pope on Thursday. And then 24 hours later, he resigns his post effective the end of October, not just as Speaker, but unsurprisingly, he also is a member of Congress. He's done.
There are tears of joy all over the country.
Right. Now, does he deserve some credit for helping to get Republicans the control of the House and some blame for what they then did with that control?
You would know better than I. I'd have to go back and look at what his role was in recruiting candidates, raising money for that cycle where that occurred in 2010. But I would have to say that he might have been more of a caretaker of that effort in the giant wave that occurred in 2010.
Obamacare reaction.
Obamacare, and the whole wave election, one of the biggest waves in the history of the country. I'm actually fairly fond of John Boehner. I love his life story. I love the rise of a guy from a very tough background, and I like the fact he shows some emotion. I'm also a public weeper sometimes, not as often as John Boehner, and a little drier.
Please try and keep it together here.
I'm going to do my best.
Yeah.
But you don't really want to be a speaker when you have constant internecine warfare for lack of bold leadership at a time when the country needs bold leadership out of you as the primary opposition leader to a president who is destroying the country, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and it was interesting, too. I mean, before this announcement, Mark Meadows, one Republican backbencher, had previously called for Boehner's resignation. So if people start to feel comfortable publicly calling outside of caucus, right, outside of a personal interaction, but publicly calling, making a splash about it's time for this guy to go, that also shows that maybe the discipline in the caucus is no longer there because the faith in his leadership is no longer there.
I think this relates back to a conversation we had earlier in the show about Speaker Madigan. In both of them speakers, one of Congress, one of the General Assembly, House of Representatives here in Illinois. Power is a funny thing. Invincibility looks impenetrable. The Berlin Wall was impenetrable, was never going to come down. But once you start to have these moments you've just discussed, where people start calling for your resignation, or you start to lose votes, and your members start to abandon you, and people feel more comfortable criticizing you, it's like the mortar in a brick wall. The mortar starts to crumble and the bricks fall down, and suddenly that wall looks pretty penetrable.
Well, and frankly, at the state level, didn't we have in 2014 a little bit what we see going on at the national level in advance of the 2016 election? Rauner never held public office before, outsider, running against three guys who've been in Springfield, each about 20 years. And you had Republicans that just say, even if I disagree with them on some particular issues, we just need to get somebody new. The guys that have been there for 20 years aren't working, and Rauner wins. You see the three non-office holders running for president of the United States on the Republican side taking more than 50% of the vote right now. And so what does that say about Republican leadership at the state of Illinois level, where Rauner won 20 House districts and 10 Senate districts that are currently held by legislative Democrats?
I think what that says is those Democrats have a calculation to make. So I'm in a Democrat seat, but the current Republican governor won my district. Now, my voters were kind enough to split that ballot and keep me in office, but they feel much more threatened. And fear is one of the biggest drivers of a political elected official. So their calculation is, who do I fear more? Governor Rauner and his massive resources, for the first time going to have funding superiority over Speaker Madigan, or Speaker Madigan, which is more uncomfortable. And I think a good example of the crumbling a little bit of the power base is Representative Duncan post SB 1229, when he essentially said, what has the Democratic Party done for my people in my district? I don't work for Speaker Madigan. I work for my constituents. And once you start to peel it away and people start to look and consider alternatives, it can go pretty quickly.
And what with Boehner's resignation on Friday, and a lot of people wanting Mitch McConnell to follow right behind him, it's a cautionary tale for House Superminority Leader Jim Durkin and Senate Superminority Leader Christine Radogno that were they, with Rauner's help, to get majorities, bold leadership is going to be required.
Well, so when we first came onto the scene a number of years ago, this was the argument we made to House and Senate leadership here in Illinois. And the argument we made was stand for something. Have an agenda that is clear, differentiating, pro-freedom, pro-free market, and stand for it. And the response I got was, but we can't pass anything. And I kept saying, this isn't about passing legislation. This is about communicating to the engaged electorate that you stand for something different that will be better for them. And it happens even when you're in the majority, not just the minority.